Happiness is living a rich and meaningful life in which we feel the full range of human emotions, both the pleasant ones and the painful ones.
Welcome to Be Human, Russ.
Thanks for having me.
So Russ, where I would love to start is, before you kind of moved into the space that you work in now, you had a successful career, dream job, high income, high status, yet you were anxious, depressed, overweight, and to my understanding, at times even suicidal. So I'd love to sort of get to know you on a more personal level. Can you share more about that time in your life and how it led you to the exploration of what is happiness and the traps surrounding it?
Yeah, sure. You're talking about when I was in my mid-20s, when I first graduated as a doctor, and the myth was, you work hard, you study, you pass your exams, you get this dream job, you've got status, you've got money, life's going to be wonderful, and it wasn't. I was shocked to find that the myth didn't live up to the hype. I mean, no, I've said that wrong. I need more coffee. Anyway, it was a myth, and life didn't live up to the hype. And so in my mid-20s, I was this junior doctor, and I was very miserable, and I didn't enjoy the work, and I didn't find it meaningful, and I had a very harsh inner critic that was constantly telling me everything that was wrong about me and my life, and there's an extremely anxious, constant state of anxiety about doing the wrong thing, making the wrong diagnosis, giving the wrong treatment, getting something wrong. And I was trying to push away all these thoughts and feelings, and the main method that I was using to do that was eating lots and lots of junk food, especially chocolates, especially Tim Tams, which people outside Australia may not know is kind of it's kind of like the Australian national food, isn't it? It's kind of like the chocolate coated Tim Tam, the double coated chocolate Tim Tam. It's kind of these beautiful chocolate biscuits. There's 10 in a packet, and on a typical day at work, I was going through 5 packets of Tim Tams. Just constantly. So my weight was, I was 20 kilograms heavier than I am today. I had high blood pressure. I was miserable. I was depressed. And I was like, hey, this shouldn't be the case. I followed the rules. I've done what they said,
Yeah.
And so I started, wanting to find out why I was so miserable and why I was so anxious, and, why life wasn't going the way that everyone said it would go, and that led me on a journey into exploring, psychology and what underpins depression and anxiety. And eventually that journey led me to a change in careers. I eventually transitioned from being a doctor to a therapist.
Yeah, it was interesting reading your bio on your website, because really mine looks very similar. I came from a corporate background. I studied law and politics, and I followed the rules like you. I really thought that, like, this is my moment to shine. I've followed the rules. I've ticked the boxes. And when I got to where thought I wanted to go, I was incredibly anxious and depressed myself. So it was something that I deeply resonated, and I feel like is quite textbook for many people, and certainly fueled my journey to get to where I am in terms of psychology as well. I would love to know, Russ, where did you get to in this exploration of happiness? What is sort of this definition of happiness to you personally?
Well, in my book, The Happiness Trap, just throwing it in there, it's kind of, the book gets its title because, common ideas about happiness are misleading and inaccurate, and will actually make you miserable if you base your life on those ideas. So if you ask a lot of people what happiness is, they'll say it's feeling good, or it's a good feeling. And if you look in the Macquarie Dictionary, the number one definition that it gives, a few definitions of happiness, but the first one is a state of pleasure or contentment. So if this is your notion of happiness, that it's a state of pleasure or contentment or a good feeling or feeling good, then there's no such thing as lasting happiness. How long can a state of pleasure or contentment possibly last?
Yeah.
I say to people, remember the happiest day of your life. How long were you feeling happy for before there was some frustration or disappointment or anxiety? You know, so I'm quite wary about even using the word happiness, because people are think of it so much as like this good feeling, feeling good.
Yeah.
But if you pushed me to define happiness, I would define it as happiness is living a rich and meaningful life in which we feel the full range of human emotions, both the pleasant ones and the painful ones. Beautiful. And if you take that stance on happiness, then you can have lasting happiness. You can live a rich and full, meaningful life with all the ups and downs, all the successes and the failures, all the loves and the losses, all the pain and all the pleasure. All of that is part of a rich and meaningful life. So that's the kind of happiness that I encourage people to pursue. And you know, the ancient Greeks had two different words for these two different meanings of happiness. So hedemonia is the kind of happiness that's all about feeling good, where we get the modern word hedonism, kind of, you know, doing things for pleasure and enjoyment. But they also have the term eudaimonia, which is often translated as flourishing. And that's kind of the second sort of happiness, living this meaningful life, living by our values, and, you know, kind of living in the moment and embracing the full range of emotions that go with it.
It's a really beautiful definition. And it's interesting because I shared with you before I press record, with every guest, I ask them what it means to be human. And it's actually quite fascinating how common that answer is about in being able to experience and embrace this full spectrum of human emotion. So I think that's really beautiful how that pieces together. I'd love to talk to you more about this sense of going after pleasure, because as you sort of shared, this kind of seems to be one of the dominant definitions that people go after. And it's certainly, to my understanding, you sort of share the more you go after happiness, the harder it is to experience. And ironically, the more sadness you invite. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So if I can introduce a bit of psychobabble, you know, psychologists talk about experiential avoidance, which is the ongoing attempt to avoid or get rid of unwanted thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories. Kind of, you know, get rid of unwanted experiences from inside your mind and body. And the more experientially avoidant people are, in other words, the more they're clinging to, I have to feel good, I mustn't have any bad feelings, I have to think positively, feel good, feel, you know, just have this kind of pleasant, emotional experience, and kind of push away anything that's unpleasant, unwanted. Actually, the higher their risk of depression, anxiety, addiction, many high levels of experiential avoidance play a major role in many, many mental health disorders. They also correlate with reduced performance at work, also kind of increased risk of long-term disability from just about any type of illness or injury. Wow. So this kind of agenda, I have to feel good, stop feeling bad, push away my pain, make myself feel good, it is highly toxic, it's highly pathological. We can explore why if you want, but I just wanted to kind of put out there that there's lots and lots of research on this.
Yeah, let's definitely explore. Please elaborate on that.
Well, so one thing is when it's very, very important for me to feel good and not feel bad, then I start avoiding important areas of life that trigger difficult thoughts and feelings. So my life starts to get smaller and smaller. You know, I'm not going to go to that thing. I'm not going to take that task on. I'm not going to have that difficult conversation. I'm not going to go for that interview because it brings up anxiety. It brings up other uncomfortable emotions. Yeah. So your life starts to shrink, which is quite painful. Another thing is that very often the things that people do to try to get rid of pain is kind of bad for your health and well-being. You know, I mentioned Tim Tams before, drugs, alcohol, you know, all the usual cigarettes, all the usual suspects. These things kind of give us short-term relief from unpleasant thoughts and feelings, and often in the short term make us feel good or give us a bit of pleasure. Yeah. But of course, when we over rely on those in the long term, they have, you know, significant impacts on our health and well-being. A third factor is that again, a lot of the stuff we do to kind of suppress, push away, get rid of difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, actually has a rebound effect. So these methods kind of work in the short term. In the short term, you can distract yourself, or you can think positively and push away some negative thoughts, or you can, you can sort of take your mind off this stuff or suppress this stuff for a while. But there's a rebound effect. It comes back with greater and greater frequency and intensity over time. So these life costs, these health costs, and these paradoxical effects whereby trying to, get rid of pain actually amplifies it in the long term. All of that means that people's lives get worse, and their symptoms, if they've got depression or anxiety, get worse over time, not better.
So what do you recommend as someone that is a leading authority in acceptance and commitment therapy? How do we, if we choose not to avoid this pain, what do we actually do with these experiences that may feel like we have this negative sort of affiliation with?
So basically, so that's a good question. So my book, The Happiness Trap, is based on a model of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is an evidence-based scientific approach that originally created in the USA by Professor Stephen Hayes at the University of Reno, Nevada. And there's over 3,000 published studies on this approach, which for short is called ACT. And it gets its name because of one of its key messages: accept what's out of your personal control and commit to action that improves your life. And it really involves 3 sets of overlapping skills. So one set of skills is what I call unhooking skills. You kind of learn ways to unhook from difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions. You can learn how to let them flow through you, how to kind of open up and just let them come and stay and go in their own good time. You're not getting swept away by them. You're not fighting with them. You're not running away from them. You're just learning how to let them flow through you. The second set of skills involve getting in touch with your values, your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave as a human being, how you want to treat yourself and others in the world around you, deep in your heart, the sort of person you want to be. And then using those values to guide your actions, kind of using them as a compass to do the things that are important or meaningful, rather than letting your feelings control your actions. And the third set of skills are really what we might call focusing or attention skills, kind of focusing your attention on what's most important right here, right now, engaging in what you're doing. If you're doing something potentially pleasurable, then savoring and appreciating it to get the maximum. But if you're doing something that's difficult or challenging, focusing your attention on the task so that you can act effectively. And those 3 skill sets all overlap to give another bit of psychobabble: psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility is your ability to basically be in the present moment, right here, right now, focused on what's important, engaging in what you're doing. Open up and make room for the thoughts and feelings that are showing up in this moment, let them flow through you, and to kind of do what matters, to kind of act in line with your values. And the higher level of psychological flexibility, the greater your health, well-being, confidence, vitality. It provides recovery from all sorts of mental illness. It's resilience in the face of trauma and crisis. So it's a pretty good skill set.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely beautiful. I'd love to explore the mind a little bit with you, Russ, in relation to this, because, we can kind of sit back and think, well, most people do want to experience pleasure. Most people do want to have great thoughts. Most people do want to experience happiness, but yet it seems so goddamn hard a lot of the time. Can you speak more to the relationship between our mind evolution and this sense of psychological suffering that we experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, the human mind has evolved in such a way that it actually naturally predisposes us to psychological suffering. If you kind of if you think back to caveman or cavewoman days, kind of Paleolithic era, if there ever was a cave person that was, really into positive thinking, everything's wonderful, everything, they didn't live very long.
Yeah,
That one wasn't your ancestor.
mm,
You came from the cave person that was always on the lookout for things that could hurt or harm you, because it's a dangerous time. There's things that can eat you and kill you very, very easily. So, if you've got this kind of positive thinking cave person, like, oh, that rustling sound in the bushes, that's just a sparrow. Chomp, that wasn't your ancestor. You came from the one that said, oh, that
mm.
rustling sound in the bushes might be a saber-toothed tiger, and take a step back and, grab your spear. Because even if they were wrong 99 times out of 100, the one time they were right, it saved their life. And so they lived longer and had more offspring. And so this is kind of your brain, your mind is kind of hardwired to kind of spot danger, anticipate. It's always on the lookout for things that could hurt or harm you. And I'm sure many of your listeners or viewers can relate to being awake at 3 o'clock in the morning with your mind warning you about things that might hurt or harm you. I certainly have had that. I'm sure. Have you, Jenna? You kind of.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I experienced adrenal fatigue. So it was very much that fight or flight experience for quite some while. And I always used to wake up at about 2, 3 a.m. and just was wide awake for a good hour, just, having lots of chatter in the mind. So I can definitely resonate with what you're speaking to.
Well, another thing that's kind of, important in Paleolithic times is the ability to make snap judgments. You see that shadow on the horizon. Is that a friend or a foe? That sound in the back of the cave, is that a bear or is that a raccoon? You need to make these instant snap judgments, and of course, that's life-saving. But in the modern era, our mind makes snap judgments all the time, and often they're unhelpful and often quite negative. And another thing that's essential is you've got to fit in with the group. Like as a cave person, if the group kick you out, you're not going to survive very long. Yeah, if you make it to, the wolves will eat you for lunch. If you survive lunch with the wolves, the bears will have you for dinner. You won't make it till breakfast the next day. And so, another thing that happens is how does your mind ensure that you survive in a group? Well, it compares you to every other member of the group. Am I fitting in? Am I following the rules? Am I contributing? Am I doing enough? Am I doing anything that might get me thrown out? Does this sound a bit like your mind, Jenna?
Yeah, certainly. I think we all experience it. And that's something I'd love you to expand on, Russ, because I think this piece of comparison and this feeling of not good enough, we all experience to some extent. And I think is something that can be quite debilitating for some people and dominating for some people. How do you advise to work with sort of that sort of deep innate feeling of not enoughness?
Well, the first step is to recognize that it's normal and everyone has it. If you think about it, when you first start comparing yourself to other members of the group, you're a toddler. So everyone in your group is bigger, stronger, faster, smarter than you. And you're like, oh, okay, so I'm not good enough starts young for just about everyone. Even if you had a wonderful childhood, but obviously if you had an awful childhood, then you also internalize all of that, what's wrong with me that my caregivers are treating me so badly and so forth. And the other thing, if we make the comparison between the modern era and the cave person era, then back then the group was very small. There was only a few people to compare yourself to, but in the modern era you can compare yourself to everyone. There's YouTube and Facebook and TV shows and fictional characters in books and movies that you can compare yourself to. Teenage girl can compare her body to an airbrushed supermodel, and so as a result of this constant comparison to, the group that is so huge, and you can always find people that are better or smarter or more attractive in some way, the kind of I'm not good enough story just gets more and more reinforced the older that you get. So the first thing is to kind of recognize it's normal. A lot of people, when they first come to coaching or therapy, come with the idea there's something wrong with me. I've got all these negative thoughts. It's normal. Everybody has them. And then the second step is to kind of recognize that you're not going to just kind of magically stop them from showing up. It's like there's no delete button in the brain. If your mind has been telling you the I'm not good enough story for 40 years, you're not suddenly going to be able to get rid of that. But what you can do is learn how to unhook from it, how to take the power and impact out of that story, so that when it shows up, it doesn't kind of jerk you around or pull you down or stop you from doing the things you want to do. So if we look at neuroplasticity, this idea that the brain is plastic and changes, it doesn't change by pulling out old neuronal pathways. It changes by laying down new ones on top of the old ones. So the old story fires up, I'm not good enough. We have a new story that's like, there's the not good enough story. There's my mind judging me again. There's the I can't handle it story. I know this one. Thanks, mind. I know you're trying to help me here. You're giving me a hard time because you want me to do things better, or you're giving me a hard time to help me shape up, or you're trying to warn me of something that might go wrong. It's okay. I've got it handled, and kind of learning how to do that is usually, we can actually kind of learn these unhooking skills in the space of about 20 or 30 minutes. They're quite quick. But what happens is, as we kind of learn these skills, we get to this point where you often describe your mind's a lot like radio doom and gloom. It kind of broadcasts a lot of negative stuff about the past and the present and the future. And have you ever had a radio playing in the background and you hardly even knew it was there?
Definitely.
And then suddenly one of your favorite songs came on the radio and you were really kind of tuned in, maybe singing along. And then the song changed and it faded into the background again. And this is what we can kind of learn to do with our own mind. We can't stop it broadcasting that stuff, but we can kind of let it play on in the background. And when it's broadcasting something that's useful and helpful, we can really kind of latch onto that and use it to kind of live our values and do the stuff that's important in life.
And speaking to the neuroplasticity, it's really a practice piece, isn't it? Because sort of step one is this awareness piece that you're speaking to. But then when we sort of start to, remyelinate these pathways or create new pathways, I think some people can tend to sort of become impatient, and then they bring in this sort of new judgment voice that, they're not doing it right or there's something wrong with them. Can you sort of speak more about that practice piece?
Yeah. Well, look, I strongly relate to that. Even after all these years, decades of doing this stuff, my mind is still kind of quick to find fault and judge and criticize. Right. But because I've done lots and lots and lots and lots of practice, I now I'm often very quick to kind of realize it and unhook. But I don't think the day will come that I don't think there's a way to get perfect at this stuff. In all of my books, there's always a bit where I kind of say there are times I forget everything I've written in this book. There's times that I do get hooked and then do get jerked around by my thoughts and feelings. But I get better. I get better at realizing it, faster to unhook and so forth. And so I mean, you said it well. It's really just kind of it's like learning any new skill. You can't learn a new skill without practice. And when you practice a new skill, you'll make mistakes and you learn from those mistakes. And I think in this day and age, people often kind of think that they, because we're so bombarded by things on the social media, three sentence summary of an important concept or a 1 minute video that summarize, and we kind of, right, I know that now. But no, you don't. That's just a brief summary. You can't learn this stuff by reading a book. You can't learn to ride a bike by reading a book about riding bikes. You've got to get on a bike and ride the pedals and fall off and pick yourself up and learn what works and learn what doesn't work. And if you don't do the practice, you'll never learn how to ride a bike.
Such a good point. And I think it's important to just bring in that element of self-compassion during the process, isn't it? So bring that element of self-kindness.
That's so important, and so much resistance to that, particularly in Australia, and the UK. I'm from the UK originally, kind of came to Australia about 30 years ago. But this idea of self-compassion goes against, there's a lot of what's this self-compassion shit, right? You know, suck it up, take it on the chin. You know,
Right. Yeah.
you know, I find that many people are initially quite resistant to self-compassion. It's like they often mistake it for self-pity, which it's not. You know, self-compassion really just means if you think about being compassionate to someone else, you know, someone you love are in great pain, they're really hurting, they're really suffering, you'd probably say something like, "Oh gosh, I can see this is really hard for you. I'm here for you," and you'd say something kind and supportive. And self-compassion is just doing the same thing. It means acknowledging my pain, acknowledging my hurt, my suffering, not in a kind of pitying way, but just like, this hurts, this is difficult, and then what can I do that's kind and caring and supportive for myself? You know, often we kind of turn to drugs or alcohol, or double-coated chocolate Tim Tams. You know, that kind of pushes our pain away, but it's not a kind way of treating ourselves. What are kind things I can do for myself? So it's kind of I actually often use the term self-kindness with people. Self-compassion for some people, they kind of think of it as a religious thing, whereas self-kindness is more everyday language.
Yeah. And you speak to sort of thoughts and these thoughts and feelings being normal and natural to who we are. I know that, you know, coming from a history of being a doctor and moving into therapy, something that was important to you was for people to understand that they're not defective, that there's just a way in a relationship in the way that you can have with your thoughts and feelings that can enable you to live this sort of meaningful life. Can you speak more to that? Because I feel like in this modern day, a lot of this misunderstanding, which is my belief, in terms of the way in which we see psychological quote unquote disorders, you know, we give them medication, there's a chemical imbalance referral, and it's kind of taking that sense of responsibility from the person. Can you speak to more of your personal opinion on that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think over the last 100 years, and it's speeding up with every decade, we're getting more and more unwilling to have unpleasant thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories. With every passing year, and certainly every passing decade, these things are more and more demonized. There's something wrong. You know, you shouldn't be feeling this way. You shouldn't be thinking this way. You know, the message is, don't worry, be happy, feel good, think positive. And if that's not going on, there's something wrong with you. And so, you know, let's kind of find what's wrong with you. And again, you know, I think when it comes to medication, my personal experience over the years, having worked with many, many people, is that there's a small number of people that found medication was life-changing, was really, really helpful for them, you know, the best thing that ever happened. But they were a very small minority. The vast majority of, you know, clients and patients that I worked with was like, well, I think it may have helped at first, but I'm no longer sure. You know, I don't think it's really making that much difference to me. And then a significant group of people as well, it kind of helped, but the side effects are really kind of having a negative impact. So I don't think there's any doubt that medication is useful for some people when appropriately prescribed, but there's massive overprescribing in all Western countries. You know, many people are kind of being given medication way too far, staying on it way too long. And, you know, the ideal is, if you are going to go on medication, that you simultaneously do some coaching or therapy, develop some psychological skills at the same time, so that you don't kind of become totally reliant on the meds, you know.
Yeah, I certainly know in my own experience when I was experiencing anxiety and depression, it was just a lack of understanding in terms of my relationship with my thoughts. And as you're saying, like this hooking and unhooking, I was just like completely hooking onto every single one that was certainly harming me. And it makes me think, Russ, of, in your book, you speak about these three different selves of, I think, the observing self, the thinking self, and the physical self. Can you share more about the relationship between those three?
Yeah, you know, so I guess what we're kind of talking about here is like mind, body, and awareness. So, you know, when we talk about self in everyday language, we really talk about self in just two ways. We kind of talk about your mind, your thinking self, the part of you that thinks nonstop, and we talk about your physical self, your body. But there's this third self that I often call the observing self or the noticing self, that because we just don't have a real good word for it in everyday language. This is the part of you that can notice or observe your thoughts, your mind, your feelings, your body. It's kind of, some people call it your silent self, some people call it the silent witness, some people call it the observer. A lot of the time I just call it you can even call it the part of you that notices. There's this part of you in there that kind of can notice your thoughts, your feelings. If you think about it this way, life is like a stage show. And on that stage are all your thoughts, all your feelings, and everything that you can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. And there's a part of you that can step back and watch that show, can kind of zoom in and take in the details, or zoom out and take in the big picture. And it's that kind of noticing part that I call the noticing self or the observing self. And this is such an important resource that we all have, and plays a big role in unhooking from thoughts and feelings. If we can kind of zoom out and notice our thoughts instead of being lost in them, if we can kind of zoom out and notice our emotions instead of being crushed by them, or instead of being instead of fighting with them, that's the first step in kind of learning how to let these things flow through us without sweeping us away.
You speak to emotions, and I wanted to ask, because personally, I feel like there's one thing being able to step back and notice our thoughts, but when we're in that emotion, in that moment of, say, anger, for example, it feels difficult. It feels more challenging. How do you recommend being able to sort of not buy into that physical experience of emotion that we have?
Yeah, well, so, one of the most important of these unhooking skills is something that I call dropping anchor. So, if your boat is sailing into the harbor and there's a big storm blowing up, the first thing you need to do is drop anchor. And if you don't drop anchor, your boat's going to get swept out to sea or smashed against other boats. And it's the same when emotional storms blow up. When emotional storms blow up, all these difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, they tend to jerk us around and, carry us off or pull us into problematic behaviors. And so we need to learn to drop anchor amidst our emotional storms. And so if dropping an anchor doesn't control a storm. It doesn't make the storm go away or pass any faster. It just kind of holds the boat steady. And it's the same when we drop anchor in our emotional storms. It's not a way to control our thoughts and feelings, but it's a way to hold ourselves steady. It helps us to kind of step out of the emotion, if you like, helps us to regain control over our physical actions, our hands, our arms, our legs, our mouth, the things that we say and do. So as the storm continues to rage inside, I can have an anger storm where I'm feeling furious, but I'm also able to kind of say in a calm voice, I'm feeling angry right now, instead of just in shouting. Same, if there's an anxiety storm blowing up, I can drop anchor. That enables me to kind of let the anxiety storm rage inside me, but also take control of my arms and legs and my voice, and kind of say and do the things that are important to me, rather than letting the anxiety push me around. So dropping anchor is usually the kind of the first unhooking skill that I teach people. About 2015, the World Health Organization asked me to write a protocol for use in refugee camps based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And they've been using this. It's basically a 10-hour protocol. So you get these groups of about 20 people in the refugee camp, and they listen to audio recordings that are translated into their language. And they kind of do a 2-hour group practice, and they do this for 5 weeks running. So it's 10 hours in total. And basically, these are audio recordings where you're taught about these concepts, and then you're taken through exercises where you learn these unhooking skills. The results were astonishing. I mean, the World Health Organization have published 3 studies on this so far. And the first one was published in The Lancet, which is the world's top medical journal. And it was amazing that even though these people were living in refugee camps, the first study was with it was South Sudanese women in a Ugandan refugee camp, 250,000 refugees, incredibly stressful place. And most of them had been victims of domestic violence. And of course, they'd seen all the horrors of warfare that led them to be refugees, and significant depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet, even with just kind of 10 hours of listening to these audio recordings and practicing the exercises, at the end of that time, significant reductions in depression and anxiety.
Wow.
So, it was like, this stuff is practical. People can do it, even in really awful life situations, like it doesn't get much worse than a refugee camp. People can use and apply these skills, and it can make a difference.
Yeah. And how does that have you feel personally to be able to make such a contribution like that?
Oh, incredible. I mean, who would, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that, my work would be reaching South Sudanese refugees in a Ugandan refugee camp. I mean, it's mind-boggling, A, the interconnectedness of the modern world, but B, to kind of think that these principles can be so applicable. When they first asked me to do it, I was racked with anxiety, and my mind's like, oh my God, this isn't going to work. This is going to be useless, and my reputation's going to be destroyed, and blah 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 blah. But again, it was like, I unhooked from all of that stuff and thought, is this important? Does this matter? What are my values here? One of my core values is helping. If this could possibly help people in those circumstances, isn't it worth the risk? And it was. And, dropping anchor was the first skill that we teach in that protocol, about 30 minutes into the very first session. And then we build on that dropping anchor skill because, of course, as you go about your refugee camp, there's going to be lots and lots of emotional storms. If there's a lack of food, or there's shortages of everything, So very, very difficult circumstances, and a very practical skill.
Yeah, wow. That's incredibly fascinating. And as you're speaking to, it's just incredible how it is applicable to everybody just by virtue of being human. Where I would love to wrap up with you, Russ, is obviously we've spent most of the time covering sort of this acceptance piece. I'd love to sort of speak to you about more of this commitment piece now. I know that you sort of speak to living a rich and meaningful life. When we sort of develop this acceptance piece with our thoughts and feelings and emotions, how do we move on into that commitment piece to work towards that meaningful life?
Well, this is where we come back to our values. How do I want to treat myself? How do I want to treat others? How do I want to treat the world around? What do I want to stand for in life? So it's about living our values and translating those values into goals and actions. It's again, if we just, I like talking about the refugee camps because it's such an extreme example. Because I quite often have had clients kind of say, "Oh, my life's so terrible, it's hopeless. There's nothing that I can do." Well, okay, what we kind of said in the refugee camp protocol is that you don't know how long you're going to be stuck here. It might be months, it might be years, no one knows. But all day long, you've got choices. There are things you can do that will make your day better, and things you can do that will make your day worse. There are people that share the tent with you, and you can be aggressive and hostile towards them, or cold and withdrawn and distant, or you can be warm, supportive, kind, understanding. And that's going to alter what happens inside the tent. When you leave the tent, there's people in the tent opposite. You can be aggressive, hostile, withdrawn, cold, warm, friendly, supportive. You can join in with the community activities, football, singing, prayer, or you can isolate yourself. There's choices all day long. They don't get you out of the terrible situation that you're in, but they do kind of help you adapt within it and either make it better or worse. Now, the good news is that most of us aren't in refugee camps or in prison. We've got a lot more choice. And so, it may be, it's not, remember, acceptance and commitment therapy, it's not passive acceptance therapy. It doesn't mean passively accepting, what life is giving you. It's also a commitment to action. So if you are in a, and if you're in a crappy marriage or a crappy job, it may be that committed action involves leaving that relationship or leaving that job, going somewhere else. And this is where the unhooking skills come in, because if you start to make these steps and change your life, all sorts of uncomfortable thoughts and feelings show up. If you're going to leave a job or leave a relationship, anxiety shows up. Your mind says, am I making the right decision or not? You need to be able to unhook from that stuff so that you can actually take action and do what's important. So it's kind of this, dance where you're kind of coming to your values, translating them to actions. This is what I'm going to do. And then, using these unhooking skills to deal with all the internal barriers that are just guaranteed to show up. I say to clients, when you're stepping out of your comfort zone to do something that's new or difficult or challenging, to tackle a big problem or face a fear, don't expect your mind to turn into a cheerleader. Don't expect your mind's not going to be going, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, you can do it. Your mind's going to be warning you and telling you about all the things that could go wrong and all the mistakes, and and there'll be lots and lots of uncomfortable feelings, especially anxiety. Anxiety is a big part of personal growth. When we step out of our comfort zone, which is at the core of personal growth, discomfort shows up. Anxiety, fear of failure, and so on. So it's like, as I'm living my values, taking those actions, I'm also unhooking from these thoughts and feelings and letting them flow through me without getting swept away by them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for this conversation, Russ. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. I highly recommend it. I even checked you out on YouTube and absolutely loved the way in which you share your teachings. You share in a very simplistic, understandable way, and it's very visually entertaining as well. So I highly recommend checking those out as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. I'd love to ask you, Russ, on a final note, what does it mean to you to be human?
The first sentence in my book, The Happiness Trap, is being human hurts. And I think that gets to the core of it. To be human means to live and to love, and it also means to feel the full range of emotions, the ones that are enjoyable and the ones that are painful. And, we hurt where we care. The more you love, the more you care, the more pain that goes with it. So I think being human means to live and to love and to care and to feel fully all the experiences that go with that kind of life, both the painful ones and the pleasant ones.